good bounce back win for us today. I thought we started the game with the right tone on the defensive end, and so that was that was by design.
There was a moment somewhere between the final buzzer and the locker room door slamming shut when the entire landscape of women's basketball shifted. Not because of a play, not because of a stat line, but because of what happened when the cameras stopped rolling and the crowd filed out, and the only people left were the ones who had to figure out what came next. And what came next changed everything. To understand why Caitlyn Clark is reportedly being benched for Team USA's next game, you have to understand the environment that produced this decision. You have to understand the pressure cooker that international competition creates, the fragile chemistry of an assembled roster, and the undeniable, unavoidable tension that has followed Caitlyn Clark and Angel Reese into every shared space they have ever occupied. Because this was never just about basketball, it was always about something bigger, and now the consequences are impossible to ignore. Let's go back to the beginning. When USA Basketball began assembling its roster, the conversation was never simple. Clark had just completed one of the most statistically dominant rookie seasons in WNBA history. Her numbers weren't just impressive, they were historically unprecedented. Assists, points, visibility, revenue. The Indiana Fever had transformed into a national event, and Caitlyn Clark was the reason. Every arena she entered sold out. Every game she played was televised. In prime time, she had done something that took the WNBA decades to accomplish. She made casual fans care about women's basketball on a massive scale. But elite performance in the WNBA and chemistry with a national team roster are two entirely different things. USA Basketball has historically valued experience, cohesion, and defensive identity above all else. When Clark entered that environment, she entered it as the most scrutinized player on the court, not because of what she couldn't do, but because of what everyone expected her to do. The weight of expectation is its own kind of pressure, and pressure applied unevenly eventually finds a crack. Angel Reese came into this picture carrying her own gravitational field. Since her days at LSU, since that national championship run that made her one of the most recognized names in college basketball, Reese had operated in a space defined by intensity. She plays physical. She plays emotional. She plays with an edge that her supporters call competitive fire and her critics call reckless. Truth, as it always does, lives somewhere in the middle. But what is undeniable is that Reese and Clark have never fully occupied the same space. Without friction, their dynamic is one of the most discussed, most analyzed, most monetized storylines in modern sports. And when you put that much heat in a confined space, something eventually ignites. What reportedly happened in that locker room is being described by sources close to the situation as an altercation that went beyond competitive tension. The details, as they always do in these situations, are layered, disputed, and filtered through multiple perspectives, said. But the version that is emerging, the version that has reached the Team USA coaching staff and triggered what is now a confirmed decision, paints a picture of a confrontation that could not be contained, could not be minimized, and could not be excused. Words were exchanged. The environment became hostile. And when things like that happen inside a national program representing the United States on an international stage, the response cannot be passive. Coach has confirmed it. Caitlyn Clark will not start and, according to multiple reports, may not See significant minutes in Team USA's next game. The official framing involves rest, rotation, and roster management, but no one who has followed this situation for more than 5 minutes believes that framing tells the whole story. Because you do not bench your most marketable player but your most statistically productive guard, your most visible asset, without a reason that goes deeper than rotation management. The decision is a message. The question is who it is being sent to and why. Here is what makes this decision complicated. Benching Caitlyn Clark is not a basketball decision in isolation. It is a political decision. It is a chemistry decision. It is a signal to every player on that roster about what the coaching staff values above individual stardom. USA Basketball has always operated under a philosophy of collective identity over individual brilliance. The program's legacy, the gold medals, the dominance, the dynasty was built on players subordinating their individual games to a system, and when an individual player, regardless of her talent, creates turbulence within that system, the system responds. But here is the tension that makes this story impossible to simply accept at face value. Caitlyn Clark did not create this situation alone. Whatever happened in that locker room involved multiple people. Whatever confrontation occurred had more than one participant, and yet, the player being benched, the player paying the visible public price is Clark, not Clark, and that asymmetry is something that fans, analysts, and observers across the country are not going to let pass quietly. The social media response has been exactly what you would expect, which is to say it has been loud, divided, and deeply revealing about how differently people see these two players. Clark's supporters are furious, and they see this as a continuation of a pattern they believe has followed her since she entered the league. A pattern where she absorbs contact, absorbs criticism, and now apparently absorbs consequences for altercations she did not initiate alone. They see a double standard. They see institutional bias. They see the most popular player in the sport being used as an example to protect a narrative that does not serve the game's best interests. Reese's supporters see something entirely different. They see a player who has been unfairly vilified, whose physical style of play has been policed more aggressively than it deserves, and whose presence on the national team is just as legitimate, just as earned, and just as important as anyone else's. And they see the coaching staff making a difficult decision in an impossible situation and defaulting to the option that protects team chemistry over individual stardom, and in a program built on collective success, that is not an indefensible position. Both sides have a point. That is precisely what makes this story matter beyond the box score. The coach, at the center of this decision, is operating in a space where every move will be second-guessed, every statement will be dissected, and every outcome will be used as evidence by one side or another. In international competition, the margin for error is non-existent. You cannot afford internal conflict. You cannot afford divided focus. You cannot afford a locker room where players are choosing sides and building walls instead of building plays. See, the coaching staff made a calculation that the short-term cost of sitting Clark is less damaging than the long-term cost of allowing a fractured roster to represent the United States on a global stage. Whether that calculation is correct is something only results will determine. But the decision has been made. Announcement has come, and now, for the first time in a very long time, Team USA will take the court without Caitlyn Clark in her usual role. And the entire basketball world will be watching to see what that means. Let's talk about what this actually costs. Not emotionally, not symbolically, practically on the court. What does Team USA lose when Clark's minutes are reduced? The answer is significant. Clark's ability to create offense from the back court to push pace to find cutters with passes that most guards in the world simply cannot make. These are not replaceable skills. Her vision is generational. Her basketball IQ operates at a level that cannot be manufactured through lineup adjustments. When you remove her from the equation, you change what Team USA looks like offensively. You make the team more conventional, more predictable, easier to defend. In international competition where opponents have spent months studying every tendency, every pattern, every personnel grouping, predictability is a vulnerability. The teams USA will face are not underprepared. They have scouted, they have adjusted, they have built defensive schemes specifically designed to neutralize the American advantage. One of the central pillars of that advantage and one of the weapons that could break a defense wide open with a single pass will be sitting on the bench because of something that happened behind closed doors. This is the cost of internal conflict. It doesn't just damage relationship. It doesn't just create headlines. It directly impacts competitive outcomes. And in a tournament where USA basketball is expected to dominate, any unnecessary self-inflicted obstacle is one the program should never have allowed to develop, which raises the question that no one in the official channels wants to answer directly. Could this have been prevented? Were there signs that the Clark-Reed dynamic was approaching a breaking point? Were there interventions that the coaching staff could have made? Conversations that could have been had? Structural decisions about minutes and roles and acknowledgement that could have diffused this before it reached the locker room? Because if the answer to any of those questions is yes, and there is significant reason to believe it might be, then the bench decision is not just a consequence of Clark and Reese's conflict. It is also a consequence of a coaching staff that perhaps underestimated what they were managing. Building a roster is only the first step. Managing the personalities, the egos, the histories, and the tensions within that roster is where coaching staffs either distinguish themselves or expose their limitations. And right now, the evidence suggests that someone in a position of authority failed to manage this dynamic before it became unmanageable. That is not an indictment of any single person's character, and it is an observation about organizational responsibility. Now let's talk about the long game, because this decision, this moment will have consequences that extend far beyond one game, far beyond this tournament. Caitlyn Clark's relationship with USA basketball is now at an inflection point. The program has sent a signal. Clark has received it. How she responds, how she processes being made an example of, how she channels whatever she is feeling in that locker room and on that bench will say something profound about her character and her career trajectory. The players who become legends are not the ones who avoid adversity. They are the ones who absorb it and return harder, sharper, and more resolved than before. Jordan was cut. Bryant was doubted. Every player who ultimately defined their sport had a moment where the institution they were serving did not fully serve them back, and the way they responded to that moment is inseparable from the greatness they eventually achieved. Clark has an opportunity here. Not a comfortable one, not a just one, but an opportunity nonetheless. Question is whether she sees it that way. and whether the people around her help her see it that way rather than feeding the outrage that social media is already manufacturing at industrial scale. Outrage is real. The frustration is legitimate, but outrage does not win gold medals. Focus does, and if Clark can channel this, if she can sit on that bench, watch that game, process what is happening, and come back with something to prove, then this moment, painful as it is right now, could become the origin story of the next chapter of her career. Angel Reese, for her part, is also in a complicated position. Whatever role she played in the locker room confrontation, whatever the full truth of that situation actually is, she is now the player whose name is attached to an incident that resulted in the benching of the most visible player in the sport. That comes with a cost, that comes with a narrative that will follow her, and how she handles that, how she performs, how she carries herself, how she contributes to a team that is now navigating turbulence will matter enormously, or how this chapter ultimately closes. The game itself will be fascinating to watch, not just for who plays and who doesn't, but for the atmosphere, for the body language, but for the moments on the bench when the cameras find Clark and try to read what is happening behind those eyes. Sports have always been a theater where the real drama is not in the final score, but in everything surrounding it. Relationships, the decisions, the weight of context that transforms a basketball game into something that people are still talking about years later. This is one of those moments. This is the kind of story that gets referenced in documentaries, in retrospectives, in the inevitable 4-part series that someone will produce about this era of women's basketball a decade from now. Because what is happening right now, the tension, the conflict, the institutional response, the fan reaction, the implications for the sport's growth and visibility is not a footnote. It is a chapter. And here is the thesis that everything has been building toward. Reason this story matters beyond the immediate controversy, beyond the bench decision, beyond the social media noise, is because it is forcing women's basketball to reckon with something it has not fully reckoned with before. Sport has grown. The visibility has exploded. The money is beginning to follow. And with all of that growth comes the inevitable growing pains, the power dynamics, the personality conflicts, the institutional decisions that must balance individual star power with collective identity. Every major sports league in history has gone through this. Every program that has successfully built a dynasty has had to navigate moments where individual brilliance and collective chemistry came into conflict. The NBA has had it. NFL has had it. So soccer has had it. And now women's basketball is having it. Not because the sport is failing, but because it has grown large enough, important enough, and visible enough for these conflicts to matter on a scale that cannot be ignored. That is not a crisis. That is an evolution. Evolutions are rarely comfortable for the people living through them. What happens next will define more than just Team USA's tournament run. It will define how the program handles star power going forward. It will define how Clark processes adversity and whether her trajectory continues upward or begins to show the first signs of complicated institutional friction. Will define whether the Clark dynamic eventually finds a resolution, a genuine, honest resolution, or whether it continues to be a fault line that the sport has to manage indefinitely. The coach has made the call. The roster has been adjusted. The bench decision is confirmed. And now everyone watching, the fans, the analysts, the players, the executives, the global audience that women's basketball has spent decades earning will witness whatever comes next. One thing is certain. Whatever happens in that next game, whatever the scoreboard says when the final buzzer sounds, the story does not end there. Never ends there. The most important moments in sports are never really about the game. They are about what the game reveals about the people playing it, coaching it, managing it, and building the institutions around it. And right now, in real time, we are watching women's basketball reveal exactly who it is, not who it wants to be, not the version presented in highlight reels and marketing campaigns, but the real and complicated, contested, evolving version of a sport that has arrived at a crossroads and must decide which direction to walk. The bench decision is not the end of this story. It is the beginning of the next one.